Hello. A young woman, desperate to fraudulently claim welfare benefits, staged a fake divorce from her third husband. But life rarely follows the script. Little by little, that fake divorce began to turn real. And as if under some dark spell, she even brought home a young man she called her adopted son, a man 16 years younger than she was. Then, one night, after months of resentment, humiliation, and emotional chaos, that woman would die a horrific death in her own bed, eyes wide open, blood seeping from the corner of her mouth. So what really happened that night? And what secrets had been building behind that apartment door long before the killing ever took place? To answer that, we need to go back to September 11th, 2004. In the pre-dawn hours of September 11, 2004, On Yun House in Cheung On Estate, Tsing Yi, Hong Kong, lay in an eerie stillness. Most of the residents were deep asleep. The building was wrapped in that strange silence that only exists just before dawn, a silence so complete that even the smallest sound could cut through it like a blade. Then suddenly, a phone began to ring, sharp, urgent, relentless. The ringing shattered the quiet like a crack of thunder. A man picked up the call. On the other end was the trembling, desperate voice of his younger brother, Lam Chun-fai. "Brother, Ma-lai is dead. Please help me call the police." The man froze. For a split second, it was as if his mind stopped working altogether. He could barely process what he had just heard. Then the shock hit him all at once, cold and violent. He quickly called the police. After the call ended, Lam Chun-fai tried to steady himself. Inside the apartment, he looked at his ex-wife, Choi Ma-lai, lying motionless on the bed. Then he looked at the two children nearby, staring in stunned silence, too young to fully understand what had just happened, but old enough to sense that something terrible had torn through their lives. His mind was a knot of fear, regret, panic, and disbelief. But in that moment, the thing he worried about most was the children. He forced himself to stay calm. He helped dress his son and daughter, trying to keep his voice steady, trying to sound as normal as possible. "Sweethearts, let's go to your uncle's house, okay?" Not long after, paramedics arrived at the apartment after the emergency call had been relayed. They knocked on the door. Maybe Lam Chun-fai was afraid the children would panic. Maybe he was still in shock, or maybe, deep down, he was desperately trying to hold off reality for just a few more minutes. When he opened the door, he insisted that nothing had happened inside. The paramedics were suspicious. Something about his behavior was wrong. But faced with his firm refusal and with no clear access to the victim, they had little choice but to leave for the moment. Lam Chun-fai watched them go. Only then did he let out a breath he had been holding. He hurried the children out of the building and took them to the nearby home of Choi Ma-lai's brother. Not long after Lam Chun-fai left, Chow Wing-kam, Choi Ma-lai's daughter from her second marriage, returned to the apartment with a young man named Lai Yun-ming. Lai Yun-ming was the much younger man Choi Ma-lai had been involved with. Officially, she had introduced him to others as her adopted son, but by then, the truth behind that label had already become painfully obvious to everyone in the household. When Chow Wing-kam and Lai Yun-ming entered the bedroom, they saw Choi Ma-lai lying on the bed. Her eyes were still open. There was blood at the corner of her mouth. She was not breathing. For a second, neither of them seemed to be able to move. Then Chow Wing-kam collapsed to the floor, letting out a raw, anguished scream. Lai Yun-ming stood frozen in terror, his whole body locked in place by the sight in front of him. Then, with shaking hands, he fumbled for the phone and called emergency services. An ambulance arrived quickly, and paramedics rushed Choi Ma-lai to the hospital. But it was already too late. She was pronounced dead on arrival. At the same time, police moved quickly. Once the report came in, officers began piecing together what had happened inside that cramped apartment in the hours before dawn. Not long after taking the children away, Lam Chun-fai was intercepted by police and taken into custody. The case sent a shockwave through On Yun House almost immediately. Neighbors began waking up and gathering downstairs. People whispered in anxious clusters. Windows lit up one by one as residents leaned out trying to catch a glimpse of police officers moving in and out of the building. That family was usually quiet. How could something like this happen? Some said the woman who lived there, Choi Ma-lai, had always stood out. She was beautiful, stylish, and careful about her appearance. Even though she was already in her 30s, she still carried herself with confidence. She dressed neatly, wore her makeup well, and always looked composed when she stepped outside. Who could have imagined that a woman who seemed so put together would meet such a tragic end inside her own home? As the red and blue lights flickered against the estate walls, fear and disbelief spread through the neighborhood. For many of the residents, the murder was a chilling reminder that the worst violence often happens not in dark alleys or isolated streets, but behind the doors of ordinary homes. So what exactly led to Choi Ma-lai's death? What resentments, betrayal, emotional entanglement, and family conflict had been building beneath the surface? To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. Choi Ma-lai was born in 1968 in Hong Kong into an ordinary working-class family. Her parents worked hard for very little money, doing their best to keep the household together. Besides Ma-lai, the family included an older sister and 2 older brothers.
They were not wealthy.
But theirs was still a home with warmth, routine, and a simple sense of stability. But as Ma-lai grew older, her personality became increasingly rebellious. Once she reached adolescence, she began making choices her family never could have predicted. At 18, still young and impressionable, she fell in love and soon became pregnant before marriage. With few options left, she married the baby's father, a man surnamed Lo, and later gave birth to a daughter. But that marriage did not become the safe harbor she may have imagined. After the wedding, the couple fought constantly. Their arguments were not always about dramatic betrayals or major crises. More often, they were about the small, exhausting frustrations of everyday life: money, pressure, resentment, unmet expectations. Those everyday frictions slowly ate away at the marriage. And there was something worse. Lo had a violent temper. At times, he became physically abusive. For years, Choi Ma-lai endured it, but eventually she reached her limit. She filed for divorce, and custody of her daughter went to her ex-husband. After that, she found herself facing life alone, burdened by disappointment, confusion, and the hard reality of starting over. Not long after, she met her second husband, a man surnamed Chow. Compared to her first husband, he seemed different. He came across as mature, calm, and attentive. For a woman still recovering from a failed and painful marriage, he must have seemed like a second chance. After 6 months of dating, they married. In 1991, their daughter, Chow Wing-kam, was born. For a time, it looked as if Choi Ma-lai had finally found the stable family life she wanted. The 3 of them lived together, and from the outside, things appeared peaceful. But once again, that peace did not last. As time went on, Choi Ma-lai discovered that her second husband had serious flaws of his own. He was addicted to gambling, and on top of that, he was involved with other women. He lied, hid things, and repeatedly betrayed her trust. Choi Ma-lai tried to save the marriage. She cried, she pleaded, she reasoned with him. She even poured her own savings into paying off his gambling debts, hoping that if the pressure eased, he might change. He did not. If anything, he only got worse. Eventually, Choi Ma-lai gave up on the marriage and filed for divorce. This time, she fought hard for custody of her daughter. But becoming a single mother again meant financial pressure all over again. A low-paying job was not enough to support herself and her child. So Choi Ma-lai made a decision that would change the course of her life. She entered the nightlife industry. Because of her looks, her social confidence, and her outgoing personality, she adapted quickly. She learned how to deal with different kinds of customers, how to navigate that world, and how to project charm when necessary. Over time, she rose into a managerial position. The pay was better than what she could earn from ordinary work, but the environment also pulled her into a much more complicated world, one filled with unstable relationships, temptation, appearances, late nights, and men who were drawn to her for all the wrong reasons. Then, in 1996, fate brought another man into her life. His name was Lam Chun-fai. One day, Lam Chun-fai came in to drink away his troubles, and that's where he met Choi Ma-lai. At the time, Lam Chun-fai lived with his mother in Nau Tau Kok. He worked as a driver for an airline transportation company. He did not have much formal education, but he was known as a hard-working and generally honest man. After meeting Ma-lai, he became captivated by her. He kept returning again and again just to see her. Over time, those repeated meetings turned into something more. Lam Chun-fai did not care that Choi Ma-lai had already been through 2 failed marriages. He did not care that she already had a child. He was drawn to her anyway. At one point, he even paid 30,000 Hong Kong dollars to help clear one of her debts. In 1998, the two of them got married. Then, in 2000, they had another daughter. At first, maybe Lam Chun-fai believed that love, effort, and sacrifice would finally build the family life both of them had failed to find before. But not long after their marriage, new problems began to surface. Choi Ma-lai developed a serious gambling habit of her own. Her debts mounted quickly. At one point, they reportedly reached 150,000 Hong Kong dollars. Creditors began pressing her relentlessly. Once again, money became a source of tension, fear, and humiliation. Lam Chun-fai stepped in and borrowed money from a finance company to help her repay those debts. On the surface, the marriage still looked intact, but underneath, it was already cracking. Lam Chun-fai worked hard, yet the financial pressure on the household only kept growing. After the birth of 2 children, everyday living costs steadily increased. At the same time, Hong Kong's economic downturn hit working families hard, and Lam Chun-fai's salary was cut significantly. The family began to slide deeper into hardship. Trying to save money, they moved multiple times. Eventually, they ended up living in a public housing flat in On Yun House, Cheung On Estate. The home was cramped. A family of 5 was squeezed into a tiny unit. Space was so limited that bunk beds dominated the room. Lam Chun-fai and Choi Ma-lai slept above, while the children slept below. Privacy was almost non-existent. Every frustration, every argument, every humiliation played out in close quarters, with nowhere to escape and no room for silence. They were poor, burdened with debt, and emotionally exhausted. In 2002, unable to repay what he owed, Lam Chun-fai filed for bankruptcy. That financial collapse pushed the family to an even more desperate point. Then Choi Ma-lai heard from neighbors about Hong Kong's welfare system, the Comprehensive Social Security Assistance Program, or CSSA. Under the right conditions, a divorced mother with children could receive government aid to help cover basic living expenses. That information gave her an idea.
Choi Ma-lai and Lam Chun-fai staged a fake divorce so she could qualify for welfare. He knew it was fraud. He knew it could blow up. But the family was drowning in debt, the children needed food, and survival had started to look a lot like desperation. So he agreed. On paper, they were finished. In real life, they kept living under the same roof. At first, the welfare money eased the pressure. Then the lie changed shape. What Lam Chun-fai saw as a temporary arrangement, Choi Ma-lai began to see as freedom. She grew colder, more distant, and by early 2004, she had become close to a much younger man named Lei Sui-ming. He was 19, energetic, attentive, easy to be around. Everything Lam Chun-fai was no longer. The relationship turned intimate fast. Soon, Lei Sui-ming was not just in her orbit, he was in her life, in her home, in her bed. He moved through the flat openly, even in front of the children, and Lam Chun-fai saw all of it. That humiliation aided him. He had helped pay her debts, he had accepted her past, he had supported her daughter from a previous marriage. He believed he had held the family together while everything around him collapsed. Now, in his mind, he was being erased in his own home. The arguments got worse. Choi Ma-lai told him they were divorced and she could do whatever she wanted. Lam Chun-fai insisted the divorce was never real, only a scheme for money. She wanted him out. He refused to leave. The flat turned into a pressure chamber. Then came September 10th, 2004. That night, they went to dinner with the children. From the outside, it looked normal. It wasn't. Lam Chun-fai watched Choi Ma-lai laugh with the kids, then turn cold the moment she looked at him. He went home early, already feeling sick, already stewing. Alone in the flat, he replayed everything. The debt, the fake divorce, the welfare fraud, the younger lover, the shame. By the time Choi Ma-lai came home, he was boiling. She walked in, ignored him, and started gathering her things. She was going out again, reportedly to meet Lei Sui-ming. Lam Chun-fai blocked the doorway. They argued, loudly, bitterly. The children were nearby. He tried to quiet her down. She got louder. Then she went for the deepest wounds. She mocked him, said the family would have starved without the welfare money, said Lei Sui-ming was better than him in every way, made it clear she was not ending the affair. Something in him broke. Lam Chun-fai put his hand over her mouth to stop the shouting. She fought him. He tightened his grip. Within moments, her resistance faded. Then it stopped. Choi Ma-lai collapsed. The rage burned out. Reality rushed in. He panicked, tried to wake her, lifted her onto the bed, pulled a blanket over her as if that could make the scene less real. Then he called his older brother and said Ma-lai was dead. He asked him to call the police. After that, he contacted her brother, gathered the children, and took them out of the flat. The deeper the case went, the uglier the picture became. This was not one bad night. It was years of pressure packed into one space. Debt, fraud, betrayal, resentment, a fake divorce that stopped being fake, a younger man brought openly into the home, children forced to live inside the fallout. At trial, Lam Chun-fai did not deny causing her death. What he denied was murder. His defense said he lost control in a moment of severe emotional provocation. The prosecution pointed to the evidence, significant force to the neck, and delay in allowing help to reach her. The jury returned its verdict in October 2005. Not guilty of murder, guilty of manslaughter. Lam Chun-fai was sentenced to 9 years in prison, but the sentence did not end the damage. The children still had to live with what they saw, what they heard, and what they lost. One daughter found her mother's body. The younger children grew up knowing their father killed their mother. Those kinds of injuries do not heal when a courtroom empties. Lam Chun-fai was later released early in 2012 for good behavior. Then, in 2013, he was back in the news. This time, police in Kwantung stopped a minibus driver who had left his engine running in violation of regulations. The driver refused to cooperate. The encounter turned physical. He was later charged with obstructing an officer and assaulting police. That driver was Lam Chun-fai. He admitted one charge, was convicted on another, and sentenced to 14 days in jail. And that is what this case became. Not one argument, a chain reaction. A fake divorce for money, a home built on debt and strain, a woman trying to get out, a man who felt humiliated and discarded, children trapped in the middle, a lover brought openly into the home like the final insult. The killing took moments. What led to it took years. It built quietly behind closed doors until one night there was nothing left to stop it.